and gentlemen, welcome to Getting Over versus Being Put Over. I am your host, and let's get right into it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here. First off, sorry about last week. Last week. My apologies on that and whatnot. Had a lot going on. I was supposed to actually be in a podcast with a group of very cool people, and I ended up having to cancel that at the last minute. It was just kind of shitty. But my apologies all around. But I'm going to make it up to you because there'll be 2 episodes today. This will be the first one. Ladies and gentlemen, I actually have never heard this. I'm not surprised, and I've read and I've heard from like really, really old wrestling fans, older wrestling fans, I don't want to be disrespectful, about promoters feeling a certain type of way after the shit that Vince did, and saying maybe, in passing that, I'd like to get my hands on Vince or whatever. But I'd never heard an actual quote-unquote plot to actually killing Vince McMahon. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand that when Vince Jr. basically stepped into the game, it seems like his whole MO was to get rid of everybody, to be honest. Either have them all work for him, either starve them out, or just force them all into retirement. And forcing them into retirement and starving them out are 2 separate things. But to actually have potentially other promoters who are part of the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, actually considering murking this dude is kind of wild to me, especially being that Vince Sr. was part of the NWA. Matter of fact, he was part of it twice. And under reasonable circumstances, Vince Sr. did good business. There's certainly some outliers. There's always going to be some situations you have with other people, but essentially, he did good business. So that in itself should be enough to where you wouldn't want to do and or bring any harm upon his child. But Jesus Christ, ladies and gentlemen, we're here with obviously the great Jim Cornette, going over the situation that speaks on that. Actually, with Jim Cornette and Brian Last, to be honest with you, and they're going to be talking about it. The title of the video, which the link will be down in the description, as all videos will, is Jim Cornette on promoters wanting to kill Vince McMahon. This was published on August 13th of 2019. Let's just get into the madness. Now, if I remember correctly, because I was trying to find Jim Ross's video on this. Well, if I don't find it, and I didn't find it, so that's why I don't have it. We'll go over that later. But Jim Ross actually was the one who heard this, and I guess Jim Cornette ended up hearing it later. So it's a second-hand account, but it's Jim Cornette. I'm sure he's asked around over the years and so on and so forth. It's I think it'll be an interesting thing to talk about, interesting to kind of get into. Yet again, as you guys know, I like history, and as I've been looking into the territories or whatnot, you're talking about a lot of men who had a lot of power. Matter of fact, there was actually some very powerful women in wrestling back then too, whether they actually bought into the business or their husbands died or were sick and whatever, and they took over, kind of like with certain, syndicates and whatnot, or cartels where women are looked at equal to men and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of powerful women as well. But there were a lot of men there's a lot of promoters who had a lot of money and had a lot of power, a lot of influence, and so on and so forth. And going after Vince was probably a really bad idea. You know what I'm saying? Like, Vince had a whole lot of money, he had a whole lot of reach, but then Vince was legit trying to get these guys up and out of there. He was legit rating their talent. Greg Gagne is a great example. Well, Vern and Greg Gagne are perfect examples of that shit. Not to say that they didn't try to do vice versa. He starved a lot of people out, man. He made deals with a lot of people and reneged on a lot of that shit. He did a lot to build the empire that he has now. And trust me, no empire was built on good intentions at the end of the day. But enough of that for now, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead and get into this. Let's get in. Let's hear the plot. There'll probably be a part 2 to this because I want to find Jim Ross's version of it and whatnot, because I think it'll be a good listen as well. But we're gonna go with Cornette's version and whatnot because it's always gonna be entertaining. Him and Brian are funny as hell. So let's go with that. Yeah, that's the situation for right now. I'm not going to spoil what the next video is going to be, but it's a thing. You have to come back later. You know the network. You come back to the channel later if you want to see that one. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Getting Over versus Being Put Over, and I'll see you guys in just a second. Oh shit.
I've heard stories or rumors that the territory promoters, at some point or another, were wanting to kill Vince or have him killed. Do you have any insight?
My apologies on that. Buggy mechanics, and I still don't have the settings completely together for this. My fault.
I've heard stories or rumors that the territory promoters, at some point or another, were wanting to kill Vince or have him killed. Do you have any insight over how serious this was, or if any actual plotting or planning took place to that end?
It wasn't all of them.
Yeah, it probably wasn't all of them. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here with Jim Cornette and the great Brian Lass. Let's see, Jim Cornette on promoters wanting to kill Vince McMahon. This is from August 13th of 2019. The link will be down in the description, as it is with all videos that I use. Here we go. Oh, shit. Here we go. Like I said, the fella. Well, first off, that right there is Ole Anderson and obviously Jim Cornette, and the guy that's in the stall in the back is supposed to be Jim Ross. So there you go on that.
Not everybody. There were several. I was not at the NWA meeting also when this all was brought up, but I've heard the story about it, and yeah, and I believe it wholeheartedly. There was probably 2 or 3 of the more dedicated veteran promoters that thought, well, let's have this fucking guy whacked. And I don't know. It was probably equal parts he's running our territory and equal parts he's exposed to business on national television. And they thought it'd be better to get him out of the way, but cooler heads prevailed. I don't think it actually got to unless somebody was making some phone calls they weren't telling everybody else about. I don't think it actually got into well, let's see if we can find the guy to do this stage, but it was definitely discussed. Why wouldn't it be?
Now, the parameters, which is why I wish I had Jim Ross's version of it, but we'll leave that for another time, is this was bathroom locker room talk. You know what I'm saying? You got a couple of guys, they're all at this meeting and whatnot, a couple of guys going to the bathroom because they're all taking a break or whatever, and, you know, some guys got heated and they were like, man, fuck this asshole, let's just get him the fuck up and out of here. And, you know, most people, as I said early on in my monologue, if you will, that, you know, a lot of those guys knew his father, and they did good business with him, or even if they had any problems with his father, they still respected the man to, you know, kill his kid. And I think a lot of it was just frustration. It's just a lot of dudes kind of talking out of their ass, but these aren't men who didn't have means. You know what I mean? And that and the alleged allegations of mob connections amongst a lot of these guys, or some of these guys at one time or another, so on and so forth. You know, allegedly wrestlers being used as not obviously mob hitmen, but to, you know, they were there to go ahead and shake some guys down or cripple some guys and shit if the mob need to put a stretch on them, which seems far-fetched because the mob has always had people for that. But then again, if the mob can keep shit out of their hand, can take certain tasks out of their hands and delegate that to someone else who may owe them a favor, then so be it. And like I said, none of them, at least as far as I've seen, no one got killed. So it is what it is. But that's all alleged. Let's keep that 100. It seems like a lot. It just seems like just a lot of guys kind of just talking out their ass. Because when you look at the ramifications of something like that, if you were, let's say, God forbid, but you know, alternate history, if someone did put a hit out on Vince, then, and I want you to really think about this, someone puts a hit out on Vince, who now takes Northeast, who now takes over that piece of territory, And then, on top of not only who takes that territory, but what are they willing to do now to keep it? Because it's not going to take long until word gets around that, oh, well, you know, this guy right here, and this guy right here, and this guy right here allegedly had Vince bumped off. Well, then they're going to be like, well, fuck, that guy owes me $150,000 anyway, or this guy was supposed to loan me this wrestler, and this guy never showed up, and so on and so forth. And then next thing you know, it's just like, it's like Rome, to be honest with you. Or we can go with the mafia analogy if you like. It's a bloody rise to power, and then it's an even bloodier fight to keep it. If you think about it, you know, it's a problem unless you can get somebody in there like, let me think of somebody that shouldn't have been fucked with back then. Jim Barnett. If Georgia, if this whole situation with this alleged plot, and that's the whole point of it, it's alleged plot went down around the time Black Saturday had happened, or after Black Saturday, I should have said, Jim Barnett might have been in a good position to take Vince, you know, to take what Vince had. Granted, he's gonna need additional funding, and I think the NWA would have given that to him to make sure he held on to it, because, you know, the NWA had faith in Barnett. So that's a way of doing it, but at the same time, blood's in the water now, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Blood's in the water now. And you're talking about, when you look at these wrestling promoters, they were like early cattle barons and shit like that. It's kind of a Wild West type situation with it. It could have been a real mess. It could have been. But, you know, that's all would have, could have, should have type shit. You know what I'm saying? It's all, yet again, it's alleged. But something to think about, though.
Let me make this a little harder for you. If you're going to picture who was there in, let's say, the 1984 NWA convention, and you have to narrow it down, you know, I don't think it was Don Owen saying, hey, let's put a hit on Vince. Who would you have to guess? If you had to guess, who would you think was the promoter or the promoters that did actually bring this up or even potentially consider it?
Well, let's say Ole. I'm sure the thought crossed Ole's mind because Barnett was out of Georgia. Barnett had already gone to work for Vince at that point. Ole had pushed Barnett
so I was
out.
right. This was after Black Saturday. And keep in mind, and I don't want to shit on Ole and whatnot, but when you think about Black Saturday, all the dominoes fell kind of because of Ole, to be honest. Like, you know, him believing, because it's almost like when he went into the Georgia office, whatever night that was, but when he went into that Georgia office and then he went to look for that paperwork, he already had some type of inkling, or he already had a stick up his ass about Barnett already. You know what I mean? And just in case you guys don't know in particular, and that's fine because I don't even have the whole thing yet, basically, Ole has a lot of things going on in his life right now. He's got a lot of stress and so on and so forth. For whatever reason, one night he decides to go into the Georgia office. He decides to look at some paperwork. He finds out that Jim Barnett has taken some money and is using that, and he's spending it as he sees fit. Ole looks at that and is like, well, he's using our money, because it's not just Ole and Jim Barnett, but there are other partners, and he's almost painting the situation that either he's stealing money or he's trying to use Georgia Championship Wrestling's coffers, their war chest, if you will, as his own personal slush fund. We need to get him up and out. You know, Ole, with whatever paperwork he had, most people are looking at it and being like, well, it looks like he is taking money from us. It's interesting, though, how those same people who think, or who are being presented with all this, forget that when Georgia Championship Wrestling was in its troubled times, that Barnett put his own money in, and no one had any complaints or any, you know, or didn't want to contend it then. So now that he's starting to take some of that money back, now that times are good, everybody's like, oh, where's the money going? And he convinces all these guys to get Barnett out. Barnett finds out that he's been pushed out of the company and whatnot. He goes to Vince almost immediately, one would assume, and takes on the role as an advisor. And basically, Vince paid Barnett to basically lay out how Georgia Championship Wrestling is worked, or how it works. Television, everything. He lays it all out. And as this is all going on, Barnett goes back to the other partners, except for Ole, and convince all of them to sell to Vince. And most of them even got jobs, too. The Briscoe brothers are a great example of that. And Ole wakes up one day and realizes he owns 10% of whatever the percentage is, owes 10% of nothing. Basically, he got pushed out. The way he pushed Barnett out, Barnett was like pushed him back. You know what I'm saying? Essentially, and that's why you don't fuck with Jim Barnett, or you didn't fuck with Jim Barnett. So when you look at Black Saturday and you look at the Georgia Territory, which led to the situation with Vince, and then Vince having his run-in with Ted Turner, and then which led to, I'm sure Jim Crockett somewhere in there, and then that leads into WCW, and then the whole debacle that was, it led to all of that. I mean, credit though too, keep in mind, Ole did start his own wrestling promotion also for a while, and it's a whole mess. But it didn't have to happen that way. I respect the fact that Ole was looking out for his money and the money of everybody else that was in the company, but at the same time, it's so, our how thou we forget who was putting money in when things were really, really bad. You know what I'm saying? So, just something to think about.
Yeah.
Bill Watts was not an NWA member at the time, although depending on the current status at that point of his religiosity, I could have seen him saying something like that.
And he would have been there because I guess part of the story is that Jim Ross has claimed that he heard this conversation when he was in a bathroom stall, correct?
I think so, as a matter of fact, now that you mention it, yes. And once again, like an old-time promoter like Fred Ward in Columbus, Georgia, or somebody like that, I could have seen the Sheik if he had still been around then, but that was a little bit after his time. But the Sheik would have brought something like that up.
What about Geigel?
Geigel, yeah, because he's not only an old time shooter but an old time promoter. I don't know that I didn't know Bob Geigel well, but I can believe that would have taken place. Of course, Dick the Bruiser was not involved anymore, but said something you would because Bruiser. Of course, there's two stories to this. Bruiser and Snyder were planning on running opposition to Barnett in Indiana in 1964 anyway, and they had already started and run a show or two of their own when Barnett got the deal in Australia, realized that he had some heat from the University of Kentucky football team fiasco in Lexington, and decided that he was going to go leave the country, and he tried to sell Michigan to Sheik and Indiana to Bruiser and Snyder, and the story goes that Sheik paid him everything he promised him, and he never got a penny from Bruiser and Snyder once he left the country. But Rip Rogers, who grew up in Indiana and worked there for quite a while, swears that one of the ways that Bruiser got free and clear title to being the guy to run wrestling in the state of Indiana was by holding another motherfucker out of a office window about 3 stories up by his ankles.
Suge Knight type shit. If just in case you guys don't catch the reference, Suge Knight allegedly had Vanilla Ice held up in a hotel room. Most people say Suge did it himself. He was big enough, he was strong enough. But I would assume Suge Knight actually had probably a couple of the henchmen do it. And in the process of getting points off of his album, points being a percentage, by the way, just in case you guys don't know what that is. I'm sure you guys do. But to get points off of his album as well as some other stuff. But that's all alleged by Vanilla Ice. It sounds like a great story. There's a lot of salacious. It's very salacious, but how true it is, who can tell? I couldn't tell you.
So there's that, and once again, everybody believes. I actually just came across on the internet the newspaper clipping from the famous incident in Cincinnati at the Cincinnati Gardens when Bruiser got sued because he threw a wheelchair at somebody.
It's the best story ever.
And the problem was there was a woman in the wheelchair at the time. But in his defense, he claims that he only shoved the wheelchair with the woman in it at the fucking guy. He didn't actually pick it up and throw it through the air. So there's no video, unfortunately, of this incident. So, I mean, Roy Shire would have been one of those guys had he still been around in 84. Jim Crockett wouldn't say, let's kill him. Fritz von Erich, Well, I don't know if he would have said let's because he was Christian and also, Vince liked his sons, but
yeah, I don't know if Fritz would have done that though, and that Fritz didn't need to because Fritz, he had Texas. You know what I'm saying? Or was he Dallas or Houston? Now I think about it. I don't know I can't remember if he was Dallas or Houston, but he had his own little, he had his empire, and he had the princes of his empire. Now, sadly, we know what happened with that later, but you know what I'm saying? That wouldn't have been, I don't think that would have been a thing. You know what I'm saying? I would expect, Paul Bosch to probably maybe feel a certain type of way, maybe want to chime in on that conversation over Fritz, but that's neither here nor there. So that's something to think about. Also, I didn't know that it was actually Fritz that actually was able to get Paul into the position that he was in, which led to where he was able to get. So, Fritz von Erich deserves a lot of credit, to be honest.
It's not like this would have not been brought up.
If it had happened in 84, what about Eddie Graham?
And the thing with the religious angle, let's be honest, religion is one thing, business is another, to be honest. How many people really act upon their sensibilities? You know what I'm saying? It's very easy. I mean, that's a whole other conversation in itself, but still.
That's why I was going to say, would Eddie Graham, would he have had Eddie and Vince always had a good relationship because Eddie and Vince Sr. always had a good relationship. So Eddie Graham being an old-time promoter, if it had been some schlub, would have probably been the first one in line to fucking plug him. But because it was Vince, yeah, if you noted, there was always, Vince Sr. had a summer or a winter home in Florida, and now Vince does also. He's like a $13 million mansion. He used to spend a week there a year. Willie Gilzenberg, all the Northeastern old guard used to have summer places in Florida. They did co-promotions. Remember, the first NWA versus WWF title matches were promoted in Florida by Eddie Graham. It was the offices were intertwined to the point where sometimes if you go back and look at some of the newspaper ads for the matches from the 70s, some of the Florida towns and some of the WWF Northeastern towns used the same layout and design of their newspaper ads.
And of course, in New York, Los Angeles wrestling and Florida wrestling aired on Channel 41 Spanish International Television, and I believe the only reason that happened was Vince actually gave permission for that to be aired in New York.
Yeah, so, Eddie Graham might have wanted to do that to anybody else, but probably not Vince Jr.
Although in 1984, Eddie's hitting the bottle again. His business is starting to really get hit. Dusty leaves and takes his entire crew with him. If there was ever a time where Eddie may have been a little different-minded about the whole thing, it may have been 1984.
Well, and there you go. And that would have been the last NWA meeting he would have been a part of. So,
well, Jim, a second.
Anyway, I'll tell you one thing. If it had happened in 1968 instead of 1984, we wouldn't be talking about Vince McMahon right now because somebody would have got him.
Interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. Now, it's a shame, and I understand. I understand why Jim wanted to kind of close up that segment. I can kind of understand. It's a bit uncomfortable, to say the very least. Especially with Graham. I don't think Graham, even under the influence of the bottle, would have felt the need to do that. Would they have expelled him from the NWA if he had brought it up? It's possible, I suppose. I don't know. It's hard to say, to be honest. They may have just taken it as, he's just feeling a certain type of way today. There's always going to be someone that's going to give you the benefit of the doubt, but that's neither here nor there. And I think even if he was hitting the bottle heavy, loyalty comes into play. All right, ladies and gentlemen, give me just a second to kind of square up, and then let's go ahead and get to our finish, and then I'll let you guys go for the day. To be honest, just a second. think, ladies and gentlemen, that the plot to kill, a legend plot, by the way, to kill Vince McMahon, I think it's an interesting way of looking. It's an interesting what if, and how would the territories have played out? How would have wrestling would have been? Would sports entertainment be where it be? Would certain people be in place where they were? So on and so forth. There's a bunch of different what ifs that can kind of spring from this, if that was the case. And like I said, that meeting was in '84, so you know it's an interesting, I guess, bit of what if type situation, despite how grueling the factors are. I think at the end of the day, it's just a legend. I think you got a bunch of people that were riled up. Some of them may have even had a little bit of sauce in them, and so on and so forth. You know, at the end of the day, as Jim said, cooler heads prevailed, so on and so forth. It's a shame that, yet again, that Jim kind of cut it the way he did, because Brian was going into a direction that I think would have been fascinating to yet again feed into our what if scenario. But yet again, maybe some things are just kind of left, you know, wherever. Yet again, I will try to find the Jim Ross version of it. We'll go over that at a later time, just so we can get a chance to hear it, just so you guys get a chance to hear it, and that'll kind of help close the loop on this. If anything else pops up, if there's any other interviews or anything that I can find, I'll certainly grab it, and so on and so forth, and we'll see what will happen. Someone has dropped a line on, was it on another wrestler? I think it's Tim Horn, maybe. Can't think of his name right now. That'll be coming up, so look out for that. Actually, Jim has actually done 2 interviews talking about that at 2 separate times. So I might actually go over both of those, just so you can see what Jim's mindset was over the span of a couple years. So that might be, those both will be interesting lessons. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, like I said, something short and sweet for the most part. Let me know what you guys think, if you think anything. To be honest, interesting bit of conversation. Yet again, the original video without my annoying voice will be down in the description, so you can check that out at your leisure. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Getting Over versus Being Put Over, and I'll see you guys for the next one. Take care of yourselves, and don't go out there plotting on people.